You ever house sit before? It's easy money, right? Water the plants, feed the cat, lock the doors. Simple. But some houses, they hold things, wait for things. This is the story of what happened to Sam Harper when she made one simple mistake. She answered the knock. Sam's uncle owned this old house at the edge of a sleepy, half-forgotten town, the kind of place where the streetlights flicker and buzz, where the trees lean in just a little too close, whispering to each other in the wind. The house itself, massive, 3 stories, wood worn and weathered by decades of rain and cold. It had been in the family for years, standing on the edge of a thick forest, the trees pressing against the backyard, like something waiting, watching. Her uncle needed someone to watch the place for a few weeks while he handled family business. No details, no explanation, just a casual, "Don't let anyone in after dark." Sam had laughed at that, thought he was joking. She should have known better. The first night, she got there right before sundown, carrying her duffel bag up the steps. The key turned with a heavy, reluctant click. The house smelled old, like dust and wood rot, the air thick with something stale. She checked her phone. Barely a signal. Figures. The place was simple. Dark wooden floors, paintings too old to be comforting, a grandfather clock that had stopped ticking years ago. The air was just too still. She brushed it off, locked the doors, and settled in. Hours passed. The wind outside picked up, rustling the trees. The house creaked in protest, shifting in the cold. Sam curled up on the couch, watching something forgettable on TV, wrapped in an old blanket. That's when it happened. The first knock. 3 slow, deliberate taps. Not frantic, not hurried, but patient, expectant. She paused. The sound came from the front door, but there was no doorbell, no footsteps leading up the porch. Another knock. Sam grabbed her phone, turned on the flashlight, and walked slowly into the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw nothing. Just darkness. The porch light flickered overhead, casting long, crawling shadows across the wooden planks. Her breath hitched. Maybe a prank? Are some local kids messing with the new girl? She hesitated, hand hovering over the lock. Then something moved. Not on the porch, not in the yard, but just beyond the light. A shape, standing just out of view. She couldn't see its face, just the faintest outline of something tall, still, waiting. She took a step back. The air felt thick and heavy in her lungs. And then, the sound came again, but not from the front door. This time it came from the back. The back door, which led to the woods. Sam's chest tightened. No way someone moved that fast. No way someone could be in 2 places at once. She spun around, her heartbeat thudding in her ears, pulse hammering against her skin. The kitchen lights flickered. The back door loomed ahead, a silhouette barely visible through the glass. A whisper of movement. The door handle rattled. Sam staggered backward. The thing outside, whoever, whatever, was trying to get in. And then, silence. Dead, suffocating silence. The air around her felt wrong, thick, like standing in a room with something unseen, something breathing. She stepped forward, reaching for the light switch. And then, the sound. The sharp, jagged scraping of nails against glass, slow and deliberate. From the window, just inches from where she stood, her own reflection stared back at her, pale in the flickering light, but she wasn't alone. Behind her, in the dark reflection of the room, something else was there. Watching, waiting. Sam's breath shuddered out of her. She turned fast, spinning to face whatever was behind her. But there was nothing there. Nothing, except the sound of footsteps retreating back into the trees. She barely slept that night. Every sound made her jump, every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind through the branches. But no more knocks came. When she woke up, sunlight had spilled through the windows. The night before felt like a bad dream. Until she stepped outside. There, in the thin morning frost, were footprints leading up to the back door, but none leading away. Some doors, they should stay closed. Some knocks aren't meant to be answered. Sam? She didn't understand that. Not yet. But the house, it wasn't done knocking. Not by a long shot. You ever notice how some houses have rules? Not the kind written down, not the kind a landlord tells you about. No, I mean the unspoken ones. Like the room in the back you never go into after dark. The light switch that never really turns anything off. The door you're told not to open. Rules exist for a reason. Sam Harper? She learned that the hard way. The second night, Sam told herself it was a prank, some local kids messing with her, a trick of the wind, something logical. But the footprints, the scratches on the glass, they didn't feel logical. Still, she convinced herself to stay. It was just a house, just a few weird noises, and besides, her uncle would be back soon. She kept the doors locked, the curtains drawn, and tried to ignore the way the house felt. Wrong. Like the walls were leaning in, listening. Then, around midnight, it knocked again. Sam froze. It was the same slow, deliberate rhythm, patient, expectant. She stared at the front door, waiting, breath shallow. She wouldn't check, she wouldn't even move. Then, the same 3 taps again. She grabbed her phone, hands clammy. No service, not even Wi-Fi. A chill crawled up her spine. Then, more knocking. But this time, it was coming from inside the house. Her blood turned to ice. No, that wasn't possible. She was alone. Right. She forced herself to move, scanning the hallway, the darkened corners of the living room. Every shadow seemed deeper, stretched unnaturally long. She crept toward the kitchen, heart hammering in her ribs. And that's when she saw it. An old yellowed piece of paper tucked behind a loose brick in the fireplace. It hadn't been there before. With trembling fingers, she pulled it free, unfolding the brittle parchment. The writing was scrawled, frantic, as if someone had scribbled it down in a hurry. It read, "Do not answer the knock. Do not look at it. Do not speak to it. If it calls your name, run." Sam swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the words sink into her skin. Her name. Had it called her name? She didn't think so. Not yet. Then, a noise. Something scraping against the floor above her. A long, slow drag of something heavy. The attic. The footsteps in the attic. She didn't want to go up there, but the sound was moving. The dragging turned to footsteps. Slow, deliberate, a creaking shuffle, like something pacing just beyond the ceiling. The air turned stale, heavy, pressing against her lungs. She clenched her jaw and forced herself up the staircase, one step at a time, her breath coming in shallow gasps. At the top of the stairs, the attic door loomed. Slightly open, just a crack. The wooden ladder leading up to it creaked, shifting slightly, as if something had just used it. Sam raised a shaking hand and pushed the door open. The attic was dark, stifling. A single naked light bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly. And in the dust, covering the wooden floor, were footprints. Not hers. They led from the attic door to a corner where an old, sheet-covered mirror stood. Sam got creeped out. And then the footsteps started again, behind her. Sam whipped around, and nothing. But the footsteps had been right there. Her breath shuddered out of her, and that's when she noticed something. The mirror. The sheet covering it had shifted slightly, as if something had brushed past it. A lump formed in her throat. She took a step closer, fingertips brushing the fabric. Something moved beneath it. She yanked her hand back. Then, ever so slowly, the sheet slid off. The mirror was old, its glass clouded, warped with age, but in the dim light, Sam saw herself. And behind her, it was something else. A shadow, too tall, too thin, its head slightly tilted. Sam turned instinctively, whipping around to face it. And nothing was there. But when she looked back at the mirror, the figure was closer. Its mouth stretched open, impossibly wide. And then it knocked from inside the mirror. Sam staggered backward, her pulse pounding. Her mind screamed to run, but her legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. Then, from the dark, from nowhere and everywhere at once, it whispered her name, Sam. The voice was wrong. It sounded wet, cracked, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. The attic creaked, the floorboards warping under some unseen weight. The light bulb flickered. Sam bolted. She flew down the stairs, nearly tripping, heart slamming in her chest. She didn't stop until she was in the living room, back pressed against the wall, gasping for air. And then, the knocking returned, at the front door. Slow, deliberate, and patient. She clenched her eyes shut, her uncle's words pounding in her skull. Don't let anyone in after dark. She wasn't going to. She wouldn't. But then, the sound of the lock sliding open, by itself. The door creaked open, an inch, and a whisper, from beyond the threshold, slipped into the house. Let me in. Sam stood frozen, heart hammering. The night felt deeper now, the kind of blackness that swallowed the porch light before it even had a chance to touch the trees. Then, the whisper came again. Let me in. Soft. Familiar. Because the voice on the other side of that door was her own. She took a step back, shook her head. No, this wasn't real. This wasn't. The door slammed shut. On its own. The lock clicked back into place. And then footsteps, coming from inside the house. Sam whirled around. The house was silent, but she could feel it now. Something else was in here, watching her. The air was thick, pressing against her skin, her ribs, her skull. A sound came from the hallway. A single soft footstep. Then another. Sam held her breath. It wasn't coming from above or outside, it was coming from the guest bedroom. Slowly, the door creaked open. Inside, the full-length mirror stood facing the hall, and in its reflection, she saw herself, standing in the room. But her reflection wasn't mirroring her movements. The other, Sam tilted her head too slowly, too far, her neck bending at a wrong angle. She smiled. And then she raised one hand and knocked on the mirror. Sam staggered back. The air crackled thick with something unnatural. The reflection took a step forward, but not in the mirror. Into the room. Sam didn't wait to see what happened next. She turned and ran. Down the hallway, her footsteps thudding against the wooden floors. Behind her, the thing that wore her face followed. Not running. Not walking, just moving. One moment in the doorway, the next closer and closer. Sam sprinted toward the back door. She didn't care about the rules anymore. She just needed out. She reached for the handle, and the knocking started again. This time, It was from every door, every window, and also the walls. The sound crawled through the house like 1,000 hands pounding, scratching, knocking, waiting. Sam screamed. Then silence, and a whisper sliding through the dark, saying, "Don't run." Sam ran to the kitchen, fumbling for her phone. She didn't care if there was no service. She just needed something. A dreadful silence followed. She hit speed dial, Nate's number. The ringing felt like forever. Then he picked up. "Sam?" She nearly collapsed. Nate, oh my God, Sam." His voice was wrong, too deep. He sounded creepy. "Nate?" A pause, then the exact tone of her own voice echoed back. "Where are you?" Sam's grip tightened on the phone. This wasn't Nate. It wasn't anyone. She yanked the battery out of the phone and threw it across the room. It kept ringing, even with no battery, even as the screen flickered, showing her own reflection staring back. The reflection was smiling. The knocking started again, louder, faster, like something knew she was afraid. The kitchen lights flickered. The temperature dropped. Sam pressed herself against the counter, heart pounding. Think. And then, from the window beside her, a scraping sound. Fingernails, dragging down the glass slowly. She turned her head. Outside, barely visible through the frost of the window, a shadow loomed. Too tall, too thin. It had no face, just a mouth, too wide, full of sharp, bloody teeth, and it was grinning. Then, it raised one hand and knocked. Sam shut her eyes and said to herself, "Do not look at it." She forced herself to keep her eyes down. The thing outside didn't move. It didn't leave. It just waited. Sam dug her nails into her palm. She wouldn't look. But then it spoke. And it used Nate's voice. "Sam, please, let me in." Her hands shook. Nate said, "It's cold out here." She bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. "Sam, please, it's me." The voice was so perfect, so human. But it wasn't. She knew it wasn't. She clenched her jaw. She would not look. She would not. The knocking stopped. The silence was worse. And then the back door creaked open. Sam turned so fast her vision blurred. The door stood open. The cold air seeped in. And then a shadow slipped through. Not fast, not slow, just moving. Like it had always belonged here. Sam's breathing was heavy. The shadow stood in the middle of the kitchen, watching, waiting. Then it raised one hand, and it waved at her, like a friend, like it was inviting her in. And then the light flickered out, and Sam knew she was not alone anymore. Sam stood in total darkness, heart slamming against her ribs. She wasn't alone. The thing in the kitchen was still there, and she could hear it breathing, shallow, wet, like something struggling to fit inside a human body that wasn't meant for it. The fridge door clicked open by itself, the dim light spilling into the room, just enough for Sam to see. The thing stood just feet away, a shadow with no face, no eyes, no features, just a mouth, smiling. And then it took a step forward. Sam turned and ran. Her feet pounded against the wooden floor as she tore down the hallway. She reached the front door and yanked the lock. It wouldn't budge. She twisted it, pulled, slammed her shoulder into the wood. Nothing. Her breath came fast and shallow. She turned back. The hallway didn't seem right. It was longer and stretched. The kitchen door was gone. And the thing? It was still walking toward her. slow, deliberate. It didn't have to rush. It knew she had nowhere to go. The house groaned, the wood bending like ribs expanding. Then the whispers started. Not from outside, not from behind her, but from inside the walls. Hundreds of voices speaking all at once, saying her name over and over. Sam, Sam, let me in. Sam, please open the door. Her uncle's voice, her mother's, Nate's. They bled together, warping, breaking. Then something shifted in the darkness. A shape peeled itself from the wall. Not walking, not moving, just appearing. A hand reached out from the wood, too long, fingers curling, bending backward. Something stepped forward, and another, and another. Sam was surrounded. She backed against the door, choking on her breath. She had one last thought, one last horrible realization. The knocking had never been something trying to get in. It had been something trying to get out. And now, it had. The sound shook the walls. It sounded deeper now. Not hands, something bigger. Something inside the house. A sound like wood splintering, like bones snapping backwards. The figures in the dark stopped whispering. They tilted their heads at the same time. Their mouths opened, too wide, and in unison, they knocked. Sam screamed. The door bursts open behind her. She fell into darkness, fell into something waiting. Days later, Nate arrived at the house. The door was wide open. The floors were clean, no footprints, no signs of struggle, just empty. The only thing left was Sam's phone, lying face down on the kitchen counter. The screen was cracked. The last video she recorded was still open. Nate picked it up, trembling, and pressed play. The video was black, just audio, and then Sam's voice. If you hear this, it's too late. Then there was a knocking sound. The phone turned off by itself. And somewhere in the house, something knocked back. Nate turned. The hallway was longer than it should have been. The shadows are too dark. Something stepped forward, and the door, it closed behind him.